My face was swollen shut, one eye completely closed, the other barely able to take in the room around me. The skin was purple and blue, stretched tight with the kind of pain that pulses with every heartbeat. Every time I tried to move my jaw, a sharp ache shot through my skull, reminding me of what had happened only hours before. And yet, as I sat there at the kitchen table, hands folded in my lap, I heard my mother's voice cut through the silence with chilling calmness. She told me to smile. Smile, as if nothing had happened. Smile, as if my face wasn't a mask of bruises. Smile, as if the family we were about to host for dinner couldn't see the damage no matter how hard they looked. I remember staring down at my plate, the smell of roast chicken filling the air, my stomach churning not from hunger but from dread. It wasn't the first time I had been told to hide the evidence, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time felt different. My face didn't just carry hidden bruises I could cover with makeup or hair, it was shattered in ways no amount of pretending could disguise. My swollen eye was obvious, my split lip impossible to hide. I wanted to scream, to cry, to refuse, but my body was too heavy with pain and my spirit too weighed down by fear. Dinner that night was supposed to be a show. A performance of normalcy for the outside world. Plates clinked against the wooden table, silverware gleamed under the yellow glow of the overhead light, and laughter rose from the mouths of people who didn't see, or didn't want to see, the truth simmering beneath the surface. I sat silently, forcing the corners of my mouth upward as best as I could, the act of smiling sending a new wave of agony through my face. Every bite of food felt like swallowing glass. Every glance from my mother reminded me to keep playing my part. I had learned long ago that silence was the price of survival. From the time my stepfather entered our lives, silence became the rule that governed everything. Silence about the bruises, silence about the screams muffled by closed doors, silence about the way my mother would look away while I was being broken down piece by piece. She didn't just demand silence, she weaponized it. She told me that what happened in our house stayed in our house. She called it family business. Those words became chains around my throat, tightening every time I thought about speaking out. Sitting at that dinner table, I felt like a ghost trapped inside my own body. I could hear the conversations swirling around me, stories about work, about neighbors, about trivial things, but they were muffled, like distant echoes. The real noise was inside my head, replaying the beating over and over again. His hand striking me, my body hitting the floor, the sharp sting of knuckles against skin. The memory clung to me like a second skin, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it off. When the guests finally left and the performance ended, I thought maybe, just maybe, I would be allowed to retreat to my room, to curl up in the dark and let the tears I had been holding back finally fall. But my mother's eyes followed me as I stood, her face unreadable, her mouth tight. She didn't speak, but the silence between us screamed louder than any words could have. Her silence said I was the problem. Her silence said I had brought this on myself. Her silence said I should be grateful it wasn't worse. That night, lying in bed with my swollen face pressed against the pillow, I thought about how I had gotten here. How had my life narrowed into this endless cycle of pain, silence, and forced smiles? The beating had been brutal, yes, but it was the command to smile, to perform, to pretend, that broke something deeper inside me. It was the realization that my mother, the one person who was supposed to protect me, had chosen to protect him instead. I drifted back to my earliest memories, searching for the moment things began to unravel. My childhood wasn't always this way. There were times, before he came into the picture, when it was just me and her. Times when she would read to me at night, her voice soft, her hand stroking my hair until I fell asleep. Times when she told me I was her whole world, that we didn't need anyone else. I clung to those moments, not because they were enough to outweigh what came later, but because they made the betrayal sting even more. She had once been capable of love. She had once made me believe I mattered. When he entered our lives, everything shifted. At first, he seemed like the answer to all her prayers. He was charming, with a smile that could light up a room and a confidence that made her stand taller when he was near. He brought flowers, small gifts, promises of stability. I was too young to see the cracks forming beneath the surface, but looking back, I realized how quickly his charm morphed into control. Little things at first, deciding where we ate, what we did, how we spent weekends. My mother called it leadership, said he was a real man who knew how to take care of his family. It didn't take long for his leadership to become domination. His voice grew sharper, his expectations harsher. I remember the first time he raised his hand, not at me, but at her. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and I froze, unsure of what to do. She brushed it off later, telling me it wasn't my concern, that every couple had their disagreements. But I saw the way she flinched when he walked into a room after that, the way her laughter seemed forced, the way her eyes darted toward him for approval before she spoke. When his hand finally turned on me, it was almost anticlimactic. I had felt the threat of it hanging over me for so long that when it finally happened, part of me almost expected it. I don't even remember what I did wrong that first time. Maybe I spilled something, maybe I talked back, maybe I simply existed in a way that annoyed him. What I do remember is the sting of his palm, the way my mother looked away, and the lesson that settled deep into my bones. In this house, his word was law, and my mother would always choose his side. That first slap was only the beginning. The punishments grew more frequent, more brutal, until my body became a canvas of bruises and welts. I learned to move carefully, to speak softly, to disappear when possible. I became an expert at hiding the evidence, wearing long sleeves in summer, using makeup I barely knew how to apply, avoiding questions from teachers and friends. My mother helped me in this cover-up, teaching me how to excuse the marks, how to smile just enough to deflect suspicion. She called it keeping the family together. I called it survival. But survival came at a cost. Every time I swallowed my truth, a piece of me broke off and disappeared. Every time I forced a smile through the pain, I lost another fragment of myself. By the time I reached my teenage years, I felt hollow, like a shell of a person going through the motions of life without really living it. School became both a refuge and a prison. I threw myself into my studies, desperate to find some measure of control, but even there, I carried the weight of secrets too heavy for a child to bear. At night, when the house was quiet and the walls no longer echoed with shouting, I would lie awake and wonder if anyone would ever see me. Truly see me, not the smiling girl at family dinners, not the quiet student in the back of the classroom, but the broken child hiding beneath layers of silence. Sometimes I imagined running away, disappearing into a world where his hands couldn't reach me and her silence couldn't suffocate me. But then the fear crept in, fear of being alone, fear of the unknown, fear of breaking the only rule that had been drilled into me over and over: family business stays in the family. And so, I stayed. I endured. I smiled when told to, even when my face was swollen shut. I played my part in the twisted theater of our home, clinging to the faint hope that one day, things might change. But deep down, I think I always knew the truth. Things wouldn't change. Not unless I found the strength to change them myself. I learned very quickly that bruises fade faster than memories. By the time one purple mark on my arm disappeared, another would take its place, and so the cycle continued, a rotation of pain and healing that never truly ended. But the memories of each beating clung to me long after my skin cleared. They piled up inside me, a collection of invisible scars no one else could see. When I entered my teenage years, the abuse evolved. It wasn't just physical anymore. My stepfather seemed to take pride in dismantling me piece by piece. He ridiculed the way I walked, the way I spoke, even the way I breathed. Every word out of his mouth was designed to remind me that I was small, worthless, and utterly powerless. My mother reinforced his words by staying silent, her gaze cold whenever I looked at her for help. School should have been my escape, and in some ways, it was. The classroom was the only place where his voice didn't echo in my ears. For a few hours each day, I could almost pretend I was normal. But the truth followed me like a shadow. Teachers asked questions when I showed up with a limp, when I winced at the touch of a hand on my shoulder, when I failed to turn in assignments. I learned to lie convincingly. I tripped, I fell, I wasn't paying attention. The lies flowed as easily as breathing. The hardest part wasn't telling the lies, it was living them. The more I told them, the more I began to believe that my suffering was, in fact, mine alone to carry. The world couldn't know. My mother's mantra, family business, echoed in my mind whenever I was tempted to tell the truth. I feared the consequences more than I longed for freedom. There were moments, though, fleeting moments, when I almost broke my silence. Once, in 8th grade, a teacher pulled me aside after class. She placed her hand gently on my arm and asked if everything was okay at home. Her eyes were soft, searching, filled with a concern I had never seen in my mother's eyes. For a split second, the words almost spilled out. I wanted to tell her everything, to empty the years of secrets I carried inside me. But then I heard his voice in my head, sharp and threatening, reminding me what would happen if I betrayed him. And I saw my mother's face, tight with anger, warning me to never bring shame on our family. So I smiled, the same hollow smile I wore at family dinners, and said I was fine. She nodded reluctantly, but I could tell she didn't believe me. That didn't matter. The opportunity passed, and I retreated deeper into silence. By the time I was 15, my stepfather had perfected his cruelty. He controlled everything, what I wore, when I left the house, who I spoke to. He monitored my every move as if my existence was his property. If I disobeyed, even in the smallest way, the consequences were swift and brutal. A plate not washed properly, a door left slightly ajar, a look he didn't like, any of these could trigger his rage. But it wasn't just the physical punishments that crushed me. It was the way he twisted reality until I no longer trusted my own mind. He would hurt me and then insist it was my fault, that I had provoked him, that I was too sensitive, too clumsy, too stupid. My mother backed him up, telling me to stop exaggerating, to toughen up, to learn my place. Over time, their voices became my own. I began to believe I deserved it. That maybe I really was the problem. The nights were the worst. When the house was quiet, when the lights were off, that was when my thoughts became unbearable. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every cruel word, every strike, every moment I had failed to be good enough. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it brought nightmares that left me waking in a cold sweat. There were times I thought about ending it all. The idea of disappearing, of finally being free from the constant cycle of pain and fear, tempted me more than once. But something inside me, some small, stubborn spark, kept me hanging on. I didn't know what I was holding on for, but I knew I wasn't ready to give up entirely. That spark grew brighter in moments of unexpected kindness. A friend offering me half of her sandwich at lunch. A stranger holding the door open for me at the grocery store. Tiny acts of humanity that reminded me there was a world outside my house, a world where people cared, even if only in small ways. Those moments were lifelines, threads of hope I clung to when the darkness felt overwhelming. Still, the beatings continued. They became so routine that I could predict them before they happened. I recognized the signs, the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath that always preceded his rage. My body would tense in anticipation, bracing for the impact I knew was coming. And afterward, when I lay crumpled on the floor, my mother's eyes would avoid mine, her silence louder than any scream. One night, after a particularly vicious attack, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My face was battered, my lips split, my eyes swollen nearly shut. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. But what struck me most wasn't the bruises, it was the emptiness in my eyes. I looked hollow, lifeless, like someone who had given up. That terrified me more than the beating itself. I realized that if I didn't find a way out, I would lose myself completely. But finding a way out wasn't simple. I had no money, no relatives I could turn to, no plan. My stepfather's control was so suffocating that even the idea of leaving felt impossible. And yet, the thought of staying felt unbearable. It was around this time that I began to write. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would fill notebook pages with everything I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about the pain, the fear, the longing for freedom. I wrote about the girl I used to be, the girl I still hoped I could become. Those notebooks became my secret rebellion, a way to reclaim a piece of myself they couldn't touch. Writing didn't stop the beatings, but it gave me a voice, even if only on paper. My mother found one of my notebooks once. I'll never forget the look on her face as she read my words. For a moment, I thought she might finally see me, finally understand what she had allowed to happen. But then her expression hardened, and she tore the notebook in half, tossing the pieces into the trash. She told me to stop making up stories, to stop dramatizing, to stop embarrassing the family. The sting of her rejection cut deeper than any beating ever could. After that, I became more careful. I hid my notebooks, tucking them into places he would never think to look. They became my lifeline, my reminder that even if my voice was silenced in the house, it still existed somewhere. The older I got, the more the pressure to keep the secret weighed on me. My friends began to notice my distance, my teachers noticed my exhaustion, but I kept up the performance. Smiling when I had to, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, pretending everything was fine. The lies became second nature. But inside, I was unraveling. At 16, the worst beating of my life left me unconscious on the floor of my bedroom. When I woke up, my face was swollen so badly that I couldn't open one eye. My ribs ached with every breath, and blood dried on my lip. I could barely move. My mother stood over me, her expression unreadable. She told me to pull myself together, to smile, because family dinner was that evening and people were coming over. Her words cut deeper than any of his blows. She wasn't just ignoring my pain, she was demanding I erase it, cover it, pretend it didn't exist. That night, as I forced a smile through my swollen face, I felt something shift inside me. A part of me died at that table, but another part began to awaken. I realized I couldn't rely on her to protect me. I couldn't wait for her to choose me. She had made her choice a long time ago, and it wasn't me. If I was ever going to survive, I would have to choose myself. The decision to survive didn't come with fireworks or a sudden burst of courage. It came quietly, like a whisper inside me that grew louder with every beating, every bruise, every forced smile. I didn't wake up one day fearless or ready to run. I woke up still scared, still broken, but with the faintest idea that maybe, just maybe, I deserved better than this. At first, that thought felt dangerous. Almost like blasphemy in a house where silence was religion and loyalty was demanded at all costs. Every time I entertained the idea of leaving, I heard his voice, sharp and threatening, telling me I belonged to him. I heard my mother's warning, telling me family business stayed within these walls. But the thought persisted, flickering like a candle in the dark. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how long it took him to come home from work, how often my mother disappeared into errands that stretched for hours. I studied the layout of the neighborhood, memorizing streets and landmarks, imagining which direction I might run if I ever got the chance. I began stashing away small things, coins found in couch cushions, dollar bills slipped into the lining of my backpack. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and having even a little control over my life made me feel less helpless. Of course, he noticed the changes in me. He always noticed. He accused me of daydreaming too much, of not paying attention, of plotting against him. His paranoia grew alongside his cruelty, and the punishments became harsher. He didn't just want to hurt me physically, he wanted to remind me that escape was impossible. He made me repeat it back to him sometimes, "This is my family. This is my home. There is nowhere else for me to go." Saying those words felt like swallowing poison, but refusing would have cost me even more. One evening, I made a mistake. I left one of my notebooks out on my bed. When he found it, he read aloud the words I had written, his voice dripping with mockery. Every sentence was fuel for his rage. He tore the notebook apart, scattering the pages across the floor, and then turned his fury on me. The blows came harder, faster, fueled by the idea that I had dared to record his cruelty. By the time it was over, I could barely move. He left me on the floor, gasping for air, while my mother silently gathered the torn pages and threw them into the trash. She didn't look at me once. Lying there, my body screaming in pain, I felt the flicker of hope nearly die out. For days, I went through the motions like a ghost, numb to everything around me. But somewhere deep inside, the whisper returned. If I gave up now, if I let them crush the last of me, then they would win completely. And I wasn't ready to hand over the last piece of myself. I began to plan more carefully. I realized I couldn't just run blindly, I needed a destination. I started paying closer attention at school, listening to other kids talk about jobs, apartments, and places they dreamed of going. One girl mentioned a shelter downtown, a place where people could go if they had nowhere else. I didn't ask questions, I couldn't risk drawing attention, but I stored that piece of information in the back of my mind like treasure. At 16, I got my first part-time job. It wasn't much, stocking shelves at a grocery store, but it was the first taste of independence I had ever known. He demanded most of my paycheck, of course, but I found ways to hide small amounts. $1 here, $5 there, slipped into the lining of my shoe or the bottom of an old cereal box. Every hidden bill felt like rebellion, a quiet declaration that one day, I would leave. But with independence came danger. He hated that I worked, hated that I had a life outside his control. He accused me of flirting with customers, of trying to make him look bad, of keeping secrets. Each accusation ended the same way, with me on the floor, bruised and broken. My mother never intervened. Sometimes she scolded me afterward, telling me I should stop making him angry, that I should be grateful he allowed me to work at all. Her words cut deeper than his fists. One night, after another brutal fight, I sat in my room with my stash of crumpled bills spread out on the floor. My ribs ached with every breath, my face throbbed, but for the first time, I felt something close to power. I had $62. It wasn't much, but it was proof that I could take back pieces of my life. Proof that I wasn't entirely powerless. Around this time, I began to dream, not the kind of dreams that come with sleep, but the kind that creep in when you're awake, daring you to imagine a different life. I dreamed of waking up in a place where the air wasn't heavy with fear. I dreamed of eating a meal without pretending to smile through the pain. I dreamed of being seen, truly seen, for who I was rather than what he wanted me to be. Those dreams sustained me when reality felt unbearable. But reality had a way of reminding me how dangerous dreaming could be. He grew more suspicious of me, more volatile. It was as if he could sense my growing defiance, even though I never spoke it aloud. His punishments became more calculated. Sometimes he would leave visible bruises on purpose, daring me to explain them. Other times, he would keep them hidden beneath clothing, his cruelty invisible to the outside world. He wanted me trapped, body and soul. The breaking point came one summer evening. I had just gotten home from work, my uniform still smelling faintly of produce and cleaning supplies, when he confronted me. He accused me of stealing money from him, his voice sharp with fury. I denied it, careful, cautious, my heart racing, but he didn't believe me. His fists came down harder than ever before, each blow fueled by paranoia and rage. My mother stood in the corner, her arms crossed, her face expressionless. She didn't stop him. She never did. When it was finally over, I lay crumpled on the floor, my vision blurred, blood trickling from my nose. My face was so swollen I could barely see. And then, as if to twist the knife even deeper, my mother's voice cut through the haze. She told me to clean myself up, to smile, because we had family coming over for dinner. Smile. Always smile. Even when your face is swollen shut, even when your spirit is shattered, even when your body is broken beyond recognition. That was her command, her law, her betrayal. I don't remember much of that dinner. The details blur together, the clink of forks, the sound of laughter, the suffocating weight of pretending. What I do remember is the moment I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep playing the part of the smiling daughter in a family that had destroyed me. Something inside me snapped, not in defeat, but in determination. I knew then that I had to leave, no matter the cost. That night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, I lay in bed with my stash of money hidden beneath my pillow. My body ached, my face throbbed, but my mind was clear. I couldn't stay here any longer. If I did, I wouldn't survive. It wasn't a question of if I would leave anymore, it was when. And for the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner. About the way my mother's eyes had cut through me like knives when she told me to smile. About the way I forced my swollen lips into something that barely resembled a grin while my insides twisted with shame and rage. That moment became etched into me like a scar. Lying in my bed that night, the whisper inside me grew into a voice I couldn't ignore. Leave. You have to leave. If you don't, they'll destroy every last piece of you. But leaving wasn't simple. It wasn't like stepping out the front door and never looking back. He would notice if I was gone, and he would come after me. He always said I belonged to him, and I believed he meant it. The fear of what he might do if he caught me was paralyzing. Still, fear had already been my constant companion. I figured if I was going to be afraid either way, I might as well be afraid while trying to save myself. The next few weeks were torture. Every day, I went through the motions, school, work, chores, while my mind churned with plans. I counted and recounted the crumpled bills I had stashed away. $73. Then $85. Eventually, $96. Every hidden dollar felt like a lifeline, though I knew it still wasn't enough. At school, I began paying closer attention to posters on the bulletin boards. There were numbers for hotlines, shelters, places I had never dared to notice before. I memorized one number in particular, repeating it in my head until it was burned into my memory. At work, I struck up conversations with a few older coworkers, listening carefully whenever they talked about apartments or bus routes. I learned which buses ran downtown, how much a ticket cost, and where they stopped. I couldn't let anyone suspect my real intentions, but I gathered pieces of information like breadcrumbs leading me toward freedom. At home, I was careful. Too careful. I made sure to smile when my mother demanded it, to nod when he barked orders. I pretended to be broken so they wouldn't notice I was putting myself back together in secret. But he noticed anyway. He always noticed. One night, he accused me again of stealing from him. This time, I didn't argue. I just stood there, silent, as he hurled insults and threats. I knew if I spoke, my voice would betray me. I was too close now. I couldn't risk giving anything away. The beatings continued, of course. They always did. But I learned to see them differently. Each bruise, each cut, each swollen lip became a reminder that I couldn't delay any longer. The violence wasn't going to stop. My mother wasn't going to protect me. If I wanted to survive, I had to save myself. The night I finally left didn't feel like destiny. It felt like desperation. It was late summer, the air thick with humidity. I had just finished a long shift at the grocery store, my legs aching, my uniform damp with sweat. When I walked into the house, I knew immediately something was wrong. He was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle in his hand, his eyes glassy and dangerous. My mother stood by the counter, her arms crossed, her face tight with disapproval. He demanded my paycheck. I handed over most of it, as always, but he wasn't satisfied. He accused me of hiding money, his voice slurred but sharp. When I denied it, he exploded. His fists flew, his rage unrestrained. My body absorbed the blows like it had countless times before, but something inside me shifted. As I crumpled to the floor, tasting blood, I knew this was it. If I stayed, he would kill me, if not that night, then soon. Later, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I gathered what little I had. A small backpack. A change of clothes. The crumpled bills I had hidden away, now totaling $107. It felt like both everything and nothing. My hands shook as I crept toward the door. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder in my ears. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I paused at the threshold, my fingers trembling on the doorknob, and listened. Silence. For the first time in my life, silence felt like possibility instead of punishment. I stepped outside. The night air hit me like a shock. Cool, damp, alive. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to walk calmly down the street, my legs trembling with every step. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I might lose the nerve to keep going. At the bus stop, I pulled out the crumpled bills and clutched them in my fist. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard, my body aching, my face still swollen from the beating. The driver barely glanced at me as I handed over a few dollars for the fare. I slid into a seat near the back, my heart racing. As the bus pulled away, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the familiar streets blur into darkness. For the first time in my life, I was leaving. Not for school. Not for work. Not for errands. For me. But freedom wasn't as simple as stepping onto a bus. When I got downtown, the city felt overwhelming. The noise, the lights, the people rushing past, it was a world so different from the suffocating quiet of my home that it made me dizzy. I clutched my backpack tighter, trying to look like I belonged, even as fear gnawed at me. I remembered the number I had memorized from the school bulletin board. My hands shook as I found a payphone and dialed. When a woman's voice answered, gentle but firm, I nearly hung up. The words stuck in my throat. But somehow, I managed to say them. I need help. I can't go home. She asked me where I was. I gave her the closest landmark I could see. She told me to stay put, that someone would come for me. Those minutes felt like hours. Every time a car slowed down, I thought it might be him. Every time someone looked at me too long, I wanted to disappear. But I stayed. Because for the first time, someone had promised help, and I wanted to believe them. When the van pulled up, I hesitated. What if it was a trick? What if they sent me back? But the woman who stepped out had kind eyes and a steady voice. She introduced herself, told me she was from a shelter, and that I was safe now. I didn't believe her, not completely, but I followed her anyway. At the shelter, they gave me food, a bed, and a change of clothes. Simple things, but to me, they felt like luxuries. I lay awake that first night, listening to the quiet hum of the building, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't defined by bruises and forced smiles. But survival wasn't the same as freedom. I knew he would come looking for me. I knew my mother would defend him, call it family business, insist I was exaggerating. I knew the scars on my body were only part of the story, the deeper wounds lived inside me, whispering doubts and fears. Still, I had done it. I had left. I had chosen myself, even when it felt impossible. And that choice was the first step toward becoming more than just a victim. The morning after my first night at the shelter, I woke up disoriented. For a split second, I thought I was back home. My body braced for the sound of his footsteps, for my mother's voice scolding me, for the dread that always started my days. But instead, I heard quiet murmurs of other women and children moving about, the soft clink of dishes in a communal kitchen. I sat up slowly, my face still tender, my ribs aching when I breathed too deeply. A mirror in the corner reflected my swollen features back at me. My eye was nearly shut, my lips split, the purple and yellow bruises painting my skin like grotesque art. That's when it hit me, this was what my mother wanted me to hide. This was what she wanted me to smile through, as if pain could be smoothed over with a family portrait and a fake grin. At breakfast, a woman from the staff sat with me. She didn't push, didn't pry, just let me eat in silence until I was ready. Eventually, the words came out like a flood. I told her about the beatings, about my mother's complicity, about the paycheck battles and the forced smiles. She listened without judgment, and when I finished, she said something simple but powerful, "You didn't deserve any of it." No one had ever said that to me before. Not once. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and long talks with counselors. They explained things I had never dared to believe, terms like abuse, gaslighting, trauma. Words that gave shape to the chaos I had lived through. It was both liberating and terrifying. He tried to find me. I knew he would. The shelter received calls from someone demanding to know if I was there. He threatened, raged, swore he just wanted to talk. But the staff never gave him anything. For the first time, there was a barrier between us, and that barrier was strong. My mother called too. Her words were knives through the phone line. She accused me of betrayal, of humiliating the family. She said I was selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. And then, with chilling calmness, she told me that whatever happened between me and him was none of anyone else's business. That phrase, family business, echoed in my head like poison. For weeks, her voice haunted me. I almost went back. I thought about it every time I felt lonely, every time the weight of survival pressed down on me. But then I would catch sight of myself in the mirror, the fading bruises still visible, and I would remember. Going back meant surrendering the tiny spark of freedom I had finally claimed. So I stayed. It wasn't easy. Shelter life was crowded, unpredictable, filled with stories as heartbreaking as mine. But there was solidarity too. We were survivors, not victims, even if it didn't feel that way yet. I met women who had left with nothing but their children on their hips, teenagers like me who had fled homes that should have been safe but weren't. Their courage fueled mine. I started school again, this time without the looming dread of what would happen when I got home. I got a part-time job, saving every penny I could. Slowly, I began to carve out a version of life that was mine and mine alone. The hardest part wasn't leaving him, it was letting go of her. I kept hoping my mother would call and say the words I had been aching to hear my whole life, that she was sorry, that she believed me, that she chose me over him. But those words never came. The only messages I received were laced with blame and manipulation. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That realization broke something in me, but it also freed me. I had spent years twisting myself into shapes she demanded, smiling when I wanted to scream, staying silent when I wanted to fight. But once I understood that nothing I did would ever make me enough for her, I stopped trying. I stopped waiting for love that was never going to come. Instead, I began learning how to love myself. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights, the nightmares dragged me back into that house, back to the fists and the words that cut deeper than fists ever could. Some mornings, I woke up expecting to be scolded for breathing too loudly. But each time, I reminded myself, I was free now. The bruises faded. The fear dulled. The spark inside me grew. Years later, I still carry the scars. Physical ones, faint but visible if you look closely. Emotional ones, etched deep in places no one else can see. But those scars remind me of where I've been, of what I've survived, of the strength it took to walk out that door. And sometimes, when I look back, I think about that night at the dinner table. My face swollen shut, my mother telling me to smile as if a photograph could erase the truth. I think about how small and powerless I felt, how trapped I believed I was. And then I think about the girl who chose, against all odds, to leave. That girl saved my life. If you've ever been told to hide your pain for the sake of appearances, if you've ever been forced to smile through suffering, I want you to know something I wish someone had told me back then: your pain is real. Your story matters. You deserve to be safe. Walking away might be the hardest thing you'll ever do. People might not believe you. They might call it family business. They might try to shame you back into silence. But you are not alone, and you are not weak. Choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. I am living proof of that. Because today, I can smile, not the forced, hollow smile my mother demanded, but a real smile. One born not from pretending everything is fine, but from knowing that I am finally free.